I've done this work as it's laid out in the Big Book with the help of God and a Big Book Step Study sponsor. I'm more than halfway through my amends, and I practice steps 10, 11, and 12 to the best of my ability on a daily basis. And I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk to you about step 5. I think it might be good for me to tell you a little bit about myself first and how I came to AA. I was raised by parents who were both alcoholics. And so those of you who were raised that way too, you know all about the secrets and the lies and the bursts of anger and the blaming and constant expressions of disappointment because I wasn't living up to their expectations. And so it was a difficult childhood for that reason. But I always thought of myself as the person who was a normal drinker. Many of the other members of my family became alcoholics later, siblings and other relatives. But I didn't right away. I had my first drink when I was 13. My youngest brother is 13 years younger than me, and the occasion was his baptism. And my parents decided it would be a good idea to share a bottle of champagne with me and my older sister. And so we all sat down together before the guests arrived for the celebration. And I remember thinking, well, it tastes like ginger ale, but I don't really like what it's doing to my muscles. I don't like, my muscles feel strange and, I don't really like it. And so that was my first introduction to alcohol, which is unlike a lot of other people in these rooms who talk about really liking it the first time they had it. But I did occasionally at family gatherings. Again, my parents felt like they were doing the right thing, by having my sister and I under their supervision drinking rather than going out with friends and everything. After my father died when I was 18, I started going to bars with my girlfriends, mainly to meet boys, to be honest, and also to dance. And usually there was a band. And in those days in New York, the drinking age was 18. And I really didn't like the alcohol. I paid the cover charge and we got 2 drink tickets, but I would give my tickets away, believe it or not. I really didn't want to have alcohol. I really didn't like it. Fast forward a little bit, I was in an abusive marriage for 10 years. And finally, when I left my ex-husband, I was 30 years old. And I did start drinking a little bit more then. I started to learn how it can be comforting and how, in the beginning at least, it helps to calm me down and all that. And so I started drinking a little more, but still in a very controlled way. I was still very aware of my family getting caught in the whole addiction part of it. And my mother at that point was drinking daily, and I didn't live with her, but she was still much a part of my life. I had who was addicted to both cocaine and alcohol, and then my older sister was at that point acknowledging being an alcoholic and attending AA meetings. I always thought of myself as the normal drinker at that point, even, and it was in a controlled way, and I felt like there wasn't a problem. But then in my 40s and 50s, I started really drinking a lot. And I also started binge eating. I found it did something to my blood sugar, and I would drink wine after work. And then I'd shop for a binge ahead of time, and I'd have all this food that I would eat. And then later in my 50s, I started having blackouts where I would get up in the morning and I would see food wrappers and dishes in the sink and everything, and realize the volume of food I had really eaten after drinking a bottle of wine. And I'm not saying a 0.75 liter of wine, I mean a 1.5 liter bottle of wine. And so I would easily be consuming about 3,000 calories in a night. And it was at that point I was talking to a friend of mine who had been sober for a long time. And I said to her, the only reason I want to quit is because I don't want to gain any more weight. I had gained a lot of weight from it and realized I also had an eating disorder. And so I said to her, I've tried quitting and, I'll last 2 or 3 weeks and then I go back to it. I always rationalize why I'm okay now. And so she recommended I try 90 meetings in 90 days. She said that was what helped her quit. So I decided to do that. And I looked up a meeting that was 7 o'clock every morning, 365. And so I decided that would be the right thing. That way I didn't have to think about what I was going to do. I just automatically knew I was going to do that at 7 o'clock every morning. And it worked out really well. I thought I was going to go into this group of people that were going to be all sad and talking about everything negative in their lives. And instead, what I found was smiling faces, welcoming glances, everyone sitting there. It was 7 a.m. People were having coffee and eating their breakfast before going off to work or starting their day. And I realized this is my crowd. And so I felt really good. And I was able to get sober in the 90 days. And after about 18 months of being sober, one of the meetings I was at, we were reading chapter 3 about step 1B. And that chapter made me realize that I can't just rely on going to meetings anymore. I know I'm going to be like that character Jim, one day deciding that because I'd had a sandwich, I could put whiskey in a glass of milk. I mean, that, as crazy as that is, I knew that was me. And I knew I had to start doing the work. I knew I had to find myself a sponsor. And lo and behold, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and sure enough, I met a woman who had done Big Book Step Study in the Boston area. She had just moved to my area, and she was willing to be my sponsor. And she was starting up meetings right in my community. So it all worked out really well. That's pretty much my history. And now I'll tell you a little bit about my step 5 with this wonderful sponsor. She became my sponsor, and with step 5, I had been raised Catholic, and so I was picturing step 5 as being like going to confession. And I was thinking of that movie Moonstruck. If any of you had seen it, the character, she was sleeping with her fiance's brother, and she knew she needed to go to confession, but when it was time to tell her sin, she'd like put her face down and talked really low. And the priest didn't let her get away with that. He made her speak a little bit louder and pronounce each word. And I left to myself thinking, that's going to be me. I was afraid of step 4 and step 5, but I had a really good sponsor who helped me to move slowly and not be afraid. So that was what I thought it was going to be, but it turned out not to be like that, of course. It was about reading my 4th step, who I had already shared a lot of my 4th step with my sponsor to make sure I was doing it in a way that was beneficial. And so when I started reading my 5th step, it was a hot summer day in New England. It was Western New England. And she had all the windows open because in New England, you don't always need air conditioning. A lot of people don't have it in New England, as you know, in Maine. And so she had all her windows open. And I remember we went up to this room where we had been meeting weekly anyway. And I remember looking at the open window and saying, I don't feel comfortable reading my 4th step with all the windows open. People outside are going to be able to hear me. And she said, well, let's look out the window. Let's see who's out there. And, there was no one there. I mean, it was a pretty rural New England town, and, no one was out in the yards or anything. And, it was around 8 o'clock at night, just before dark. And so she said, if you want, we can close the window and I'll turn the fan on. And then, I said, no, you know what? No, I'm just going to trust. I'm just going to trust in God. That's what I've learned to do. And I'm just going to do this, and I'm not going to worry about it. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking her husband is downstairs in another room, and I'm sure he has his window open, and I bet he can hear me. And then I thought, no, wait a minute. He's an alcoholic too. he's heard it all. I'm not going to worry about this. And so I just went ahead and started reading my fourth step. By the time of completion, but I had really wondered what the point of the step 5 was, to, read it to someone else. But I realized that what I had done this thorough searching inventory. I had completed my thorough searching inventory, reviewing out loud to someone who had also done the same thing, without cutting corners and without hesitation. And at the end, as my sponsor said, welcome to AA, which is the tradition, I understood the importance of this step and the closure I was able to experience from this. I breathed a sigh of relief. I felt like I was really now truly a member of this fellowship. And when I arrived back home that evening, I spent the next hour contemplating what I had accomplished, and finally I was finally understanding that I was about to cross a threshold into the next phase of my life, one of freedom from fear that had driven my actions in the past, and peace of mind that comes from truly trusting and relying on God. And so I mean, it really was beyond my expectations. It was really a beautiful experience. And I just want to say to people that are just starting out, that are just getting sober, or people that are still writing, you're in for a real treat. And if you're afraid of it like I was, don't be. It's just the most wonderful experience. And learning to trust and rely on God, I gotta say, I also trusted and relied on my sponsor. And she was a beautiful, understanding person who had been through the same thing. And I just want to say, anyone afraid of step 5, don't be. It's just wonderful. And with that, I'll pass so I can listen to everyone else, what they have to say about it too.